G'day team, welcome to another instalment of The You Project. Craig Anthony Harper reporting in for duty, as I do every single time faithfully because it's how I roll. Good. Is it still morning? It's morning. Morning, Tiff.
Good morning, Harps. How are you? It's been
I'm
a big
good.
day, hasn't it?
What?
Been a big day already, hasn't
Been
it?
a big day. We just spoke to Susan Sly from Canada, who inspired the shit out of us. And who's 49. She's a grandmother and a mum of 5, and she's got an AI company, and she's got about 74 different balls in the air. And we were saying before we started to roll, annoyingly, she looks about 35 years old. How does somebody like, I'm not even being, is she the youngest looking grandmother you've ever seen?
Yeah, it's so funny because I'd spoken to her previously and then I forgot because now I talked to her a bit and I forget that she was, she's going to turn 50 shortly. And when she said that in the podcast, I was like, oh yeah.
I'm not even trying to make her look good or feel good. Like
you don't need to. She already does.
She looks stupidly young. Like she looks 35. When she said I'm 50 in a minute and I've got 5 kids and 2 grandkids, I kind of thought she was bullshitting, but she wasn't. Speaking of good looking, look at that good looking bastard over there in Texas. Look at him. Look at you, man. Austin, welcome to the You Project. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Have you ever been introduced ever to a show like that?
I can't remember, but I'll take it.
Yeah, you just enjoy that. What time is it in now? Before anyone thinks I'm messing up, Austin is Austin Cleon, and he is in Austin, Texas. So I'm not being a smart ass. What time is it in Austin, Texas at the moment?
It's 7:30 in the evening.
And what's the update over there? How are things? How's life? So you're heading out of summer, and there's a bit of there COVID chaos where you are, or is it all right?
Well, the late great Molly Ivins said, if there's ever been a bad idea for government, Texas has tried it. We're the place. So, if you want borderline barbarous, caveman-esque government, we've got it here. So we're in stage 5 emergency COVID restrictions here in Austin.
Wow.
So yeah, it's another day in paradise down here, but we are summer is dying, and so that's good. So we're headed into fall, which is my favorite time of year.
And what is stage? I mean, it's different around the world. We're in, which I'm sure you know, but you probably don't know this bit. We're in Australia, but we're in Melbourne down the bottom.
Oh yeah.
So we're the most locked down city in the world. We've been, so there. So nana. Yeah. So we're still in lockdown. We still have a curfew. So it's been interesting times, but what does stage 5 look like for you guys?
Same as it always does. I mean, nobody around here really, it's, I would say that actually, I don't even know how it's different. I don't really leave my house. So, I don't know what other people are doing. I'm here.
You're in good company, hey?
Yeah. So, no, our response here has been pretty pathetic across the board. It's schools are open here, but thankfully I live in civilization, so the local schools do masks and things like that. So the numbers are fairly low in Austin proper, but you drive about 10 or 20 minutes and it's no mask freedom land. And so it's a little bit different. So I like living in Texas because it's sort of like it's even more American than America. Like it's pretty much like America turned up to 10. So if you can live here, you can pretty much make it anywhere in the country.
It's I've been to Texas momentarily. You're right. It is America on steroids. It's like, but also I think, and we're about, just so you know, we're about 90% Australian listeners. We have about 10,000 listeners a day, but we have a rock solid, our second biggest audience is the States. But for for our Australian listeners, just describe Texas to us in terms of culture and lifestyle and mindset and guns, because it's almost like a country within a country, right?
Yeah, it's well, the thing to know about Texas is that it's actually far more diverse. And I mean, in Australian terms, maybe it's not as big. You know, it's what you see in the movies. The west part of Texas is actually what you see in the movies, the kind of flat desert. Where I live is really more like the American South. You know, Austin's sort of the gateway city from where the American South kind of turns into the West. And so Austin is in the hill country in Texas. So it's very humid and green and more of what you might think of like a southern city being. But the thing about Texas that's really interesting is we have 4 of the biggest metro areas in America. So you've got Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio are just extremely booming cities and incredible and pretty, Austin's probably the least diverse, unfortunately, of all the cities. But a city like Houston, which is on the Gulf of Mexico, Houston's a lot like Los Angeles, just with catastrophic swamp weather. Take away the beautiful weather of Los Angeles, but Houston has the culture, it has the art, it has the food. Dallas has always been like sort of a little bit upscale, but it also more upscale, but has its own deal. So Texas is sort of like this gigantic, crazy American state with these amazing sort of pockets of culture and cities. And so it's just a kind of, it is a wild place, but historically you had to be sort of, I mean, this was the frontier in the old days. And so it took a certain amount of grit to survive here. And that still sort of exists. But the funny thing about Texas is there's like a lot of, everyone gets an image when you say Texas, because it's been so mythologized and stuff. And so that can be really helpful as an artist or a writer or anyone, because you say you're from Texas and then all of a sudden someone's got like, it's a conversation starter, at least. I mean, we spent how long have we talked about Texas now?
Yeah, it's true. Well, I think it is funny because depending on where you come from, people make assumptions, as people do in life. We're always assuming and we're always interpreting based on, because half of my audience just probably learned a whole bunch of new things just by talk, because it's like, and conversely, the times that I've been in America, when I would talk to, perhaps not you, but a lot of Americans know so little about anything other than America.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And like literally ignorant. Think that we all own kangaroos. Like people have dogs in the States and here we have kangaroos as pets. And I'm like, well, not exactly. I mean, we do have a lot of kangaroos, but they're not domesticated and we don't have them in our lounge. But I think it's, has it been, being somebody who's creative and artistic and a writer, has it been an advantage, disadvantage, or neither to grow up in Texas?
Well, I didn't grow up here. I grew up in the North.
Right.
I grew up in Ohio. I came here when I was about 23, I think. Right. And so I've lived here for about 15 years. I grew up in rural America, though, so that was good training for Texas. I mean, America is really divided between rural and urban. I think that's happening in a lot of places, but there's a big difference just between rural America and urban America. I think that's the real split in the culture. And so I grew up in the middle of a cornfield, and I would say that the thing it probably did is just let me get bored when I was a kid. I think I was motivated by boredom a lot when I was growing up. And I think that boredom is a great beginning for a lot of creative work. Because if you don't really have a world that you feel like you fit into when you're younger, you sort of have to invent your own. or find your own. So I think that's what it did for me.
It's interesting you say that. I've thought that too. I grew up, I was an only kid, and I had no brothers, no sisters. And I went to, by the time I was in grade 6, I'd been to 6 schools. And so my parents, I think my father was a drug dealer. I'm not sure, I'm looking into it. Like we always moved. And so you'd make friends, lose friends, make friends, lose friends. And I was always like this really curious, creative kid making shit up. And I think, maybe circumstance and environment do open the door on creativity a little wider than if we had been in a different situation. What did it look like when you were a kid? How did your creativity express itself?
Well, I always loved music when I was growing up. That was really the thing that kind of saved me and took me out of, everyday life. So I grew up playing piano, and I played guitar and sang in bands when I was in high school. So that was always, music I think was always my passion when I was younger. And then I was just always a reader. That's where a lot of my work really comes from, is just from my, just being a passionate reader since I was like really little. And then I didn't really get into writing big time until I got out of high school and I went to college, and I made friends with some writers. And then the other weird thing about me is that I've always been a visual artist too. So I've always been a drawer. And so it really took me, it wasn't really until I got out of school that school is this weird place where, you kind of split. I'm a kind of interdisciplinary guy. I like a lot of different things. And so school was always very limiting to me, in just that, there were subjects and majors and, paths to take.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to have my hands in a lot of different places. And so it really wasn't until I got out of school that I sort of figured out how to unite a lot of my passions. And I've always been driven by, I love pictures and I love words. And so it's like, art with words and books with pictures. That's sort of my thing.
So you've written, amongst others, Steal Like an Artist, Show Your Work and Keep Going. Where does the phrase steal like an artist come from? What does that mean?
It sort of came from, it's something I made up, but it comes from, it's widely, there's a quote by Picasso that's widely misattributed to him, and it's bad artists copy, great artists steal. The person who said that was actually T.S. Eliot, and he said that immature poets copy, great poets steal. And the phrase steal like an artist really came from, I'm a reader and a meticulous kind of quote collector. So when I was coming up and trying to figure out how to do my own work, I noticed that a lot of the artists I love talked about influence in terms of stealing. They say, oh, I stole that from it, or you got to steal that. Oh, I lifted that. I filched that, whatever. And I just always thought that there was a kind of pirate. I was like the kind of pirating image of stealing. And so it was the name of a talk I gave. It was called How to Steal Like an Artist. And that was actually the talk that became the book. But the idea behind Steal Like an Artist is just that, nothing really comes from nowhere, that all of the work we do, it sort of builds on what came before, and that the way to actually find your own voice, to find your own style, is to borrow and copy and imitate and transform about 12 different styles from other people. Yeah. And then you kind of become your own person. So that's really the idea behind Steal Like an Artist.
Austin, do you think that creativity is, of course it can be, we can develop skill and talent, where we can work on talent. We probably can't change our innate level of talent, but how much of creative expression and creative ability is just about what's there, and then how much is about what we do with it?
I think that everyone has, proclivities. They come here with certain equipment. I think of it as, it's sort of your DNA in your daily life. It's sort of, it's sort of what you arrive with, but it's also, what what sort of environment you find yourself in, what your habits are. I think most children have the ability to be really creative. They see the world with really fresh eyes, and they have an ability to play. They have a lot of the traits that artists really wish they had. But I do think there's something that happens pretty early on, maybe middle school, even, maybe earlier, 8, 9, 10, where kids sort of become self-aware and they start to get siloed off. You start to kind of get funneled into different, oh, you're good at sports, you're good at this, and they kind of lose a little bit of that creative spark. But I think everybody can kind of use the tools of creative people to, to come up with new ideas for their life, to make life a little bit more, make life a little bit better, make work a little bit better. I think everyone can sort of get in touch with their creative side, sort of no matter who they are. But I definitely think, there are definitely people who come here that, you can't like know that Prince once walked the planet and not like, or Beethoven or whoever, and not admit that, some of us come here and we're a little bit more equipped than others.
It's so funny you mentioned Prince. So one of my mates years ago just loved, as did millions of people, Prince. And I can't remember why, but he had, I don't know, something through his company, but the Prince was in Melbourne, and he's like, do you want to come? I'm like, Prince? I'm like, Prince? Like, I don't, other than Purple Rain, I'm like, other than that, I'm like, I don't know. It's like, dude, come. I'm like, So what a fucking idiot I am. We swear on this show, Austin. I reluctantly went along thinking I'm doing my friend a favor. It was hands down the best concert I ever went to in my life. Yeah. And I'm like, this man is a fucking genius and I'm an idiot. How did I not know this? And how have I not opened the Prince door wider and earlier?
I think it's easy to do if you don't like, if you've never really dived in. It's kind of impossible to be a casual Prince fan. It's sort of one of those things, like once you experience him in some way, you're like, oh, because he really was the magic. I mean, he's basically, he can sing like Little Richard. He can play guitar like Jimi Hendrix. He can dance like James Brown. And he's got this Mozart level composition ability. Where he was writing songs every day and literally making so many songs that his record company couldn't absorb them all. He's one of those guys that almost suffered commercially from making too much stuff. So it's as being someone on the planet who tries to do creative things, when you know that there are people like Prince in the world, you have to give a little bit. You understand that we all have different gifts, and the gifts are in some people get gifts in bigger packages.
Definitely. Well, yeah. I mean, he was a prodigy. He was a creative genius, and he wasn't just. Yeah, he was a visionary. I mean, he was bloody amazing. As I'm thinking, as you're talking about creativity, like we talk with a lot of different people, but often, of course, and we'll come back to the standards, but when we think of creativity, looking at writing and art and poetry and music and all of what we call the general kind of creative arts and all of that. But I also think about creativity in terms of engineering, where we're conceptualizing something, we're building something, we're solving problems, architecture, even things like landscape design, which is art, which is creation, which is creating a vision, executing. And even with my stuff, which you would never think is creative, but in science, like you're solving problems and you're coming up with, it's a different kind of creativity, but you're trying to solve problems and trying to figure things out. And even in COVID, for us, the last 20 months has been a 20-month exercise in adaptation and resilience and, I hate to use it, but pivoting and creating new stuff and solving problems and figuring out how do I run a business. It's my main job when I'm not doing this. Normally, Austin is corporate speaking. Well, that doesn't happen in a country that's locked down. So all of a sudden you're going, all right, well, how do I connect and develop rapport and do things when I'm sitting in my studio at home looking at a screen? So, yeah, I think creativity is it's kind of a fruit salad of things. It's a whole lot of things.
Yeah, and I mean the some of the art, the way that art and science have been divorced in the culture is really kind of shocking when you really drill into it, because the really great scientists, like the great physicists and the great artists, were really, I mean, it's the same sort of thought. It's the same sort of visionary thought. It's the same level of imagination and sort of, just raw thought and play, and just a way of seeing the world, because they're really, art and science are just different ways of investigating the world.
Yeah.
And there's a great book I just read called Art and Physics that came out in like the early 90s. And this guy named Schlein, he talked about how many of the great artists sort of anticipated some of the great advances in physics. And whether you believe his theory or not, what's really beautiful is the way he portrays the development of sort of 20th century art alongside of physics. So you have something like you have something like cubism going on at the same time that Einstein's developing the theory of relativity. And so it makes you have these questions. So this idea that, there is no fixed perspective in the world, that, so there's so you've got these two different fields that are coming to these, discoveries about human nature, or really the world. But they're not necessarily even talking to each other. It's just coming out of this like cultural stew. And so I always think that artists should spend more time reading about science, and scientists should spend more time reading about art. I think anyone who has a kind of omnivorous, sort of cross-disciplinary, cross-pollinating, interests always come up with really interesting thing. I think the thing that makes science weak and makes art weak is too much specialization. It's like scientists who only focus on their little narrow thing, or artists who are only interested in their own, making their little comment on this little corner of art history. It's really the thinkers that sort of, the people who make real leaps are sort of inspired by everything. And I think that's the real the spirit of Steal Like an Artist, this idea that you can steal something from everything and kind of weave it in your work.
And I think also, one of the dangers for us humans is we get very, 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 very invested and intertwined with the narrow thing that we do, and that becomes our identity, or it can become our identity. And so we tend not to necessarily open up to new ideas or new experiences or new fields.
We think of ourselves in terms of job titles or things, well, I'm an artist. An artist do this. I always feel like, life really opens up when you think about yourself as a verb, as an ever evolving process, and that's what physics tells us, is that there's nothing in the universe that is a thing. Actually, everything is a process. Everything's a verb. It's just all nouns are, there's a Buddhist thinker who says all nouns are just really slow moving verbs. And so to have this kind of but I also think that's part of the kind of modern, that's capitalism too, like that's our economy. You're supposed to do one thing and do it really well and be an expert and do your little part. And so, but as far as being a well-rounded human being, that has always been, that's sort of what the that's what the humanities have always taught us, is that by being interested in a lot of different things and trying to be a whole person, that's sort of what makes life worth living, right?
Why do you think Austin, why do you think we get or not all of us, but a lot of people, we get our sense of self and identity and self-worth from what we do? What do you think? And I know that's a philosophical question.
Yeah.
But
someone smarter than me would probably talk about, need to talk about. I mean, I think that's the way I think I think that the powers that be or the culture wants us to feel that way because that's what makes for productive workers.
Right.
If you get your sense of self-worth from what you do, then you'll show up and you'll work harder and we can get more out of you.
Yeah.
There's a fantastic documentary. I don't know if it's in Australian Amazon right now, but there's a documentary called Lula Rich is the name of the documentary. And it's about the LuLaRoe, their tights, that it's basically a pyramid scheme is what it was. And but the way they got people to be on board with sales is you gotta believe, they really pumped them up and gave them a sense of you're making a difference in people's lives, and it like really pumped them up. And then they can get them to work harder. You can get people to, Silicon Valley is really good at that. Like if you go work at one of the big tech companies, they'll tell you you're changing the world and we're going to give you a breakfast bar and do your laundry, and then you'll stay here for 12, 14 hours a day. So
and we'll give you bean bags and a really colorful environment, and you can work in Ugg boots.
Exactly. So I think that has a big part to do with it. I also think that a lot of the traditional places that we used to find meaning in the culture, those things have just kind of been destroyed, and they've been destroyed by the very, sort of society that's been built from work. I mean, the way that, just things in the culture have kind of been, deteriorated from work and from the developments. So, that's my take on it. I don't think it's really, I don't think anyone's really to blame. And, personally, I mean, I can't blame people from wanting to find meaning in their work necessarily, but it can be kind of a losing game.
Yeah. Yeah. But what do you think about the kind of, the intersection of technology and creativity? Because it seems they're kind of intertwined. And obviously there's more to creativity than technology, but it seems that without creativity, there is no technology.
Yeah. So I'm sort of a McLuhan, I would probably be a kind of Neil Postman, Marshall McLuhan type disciple, in that I think that we make the tools and then the tools make us. So we sort of use the tools and then we get we run the machines and then the machines sort of run us. So I always think it's really interesting. And like, if you look at electronic music, for example, like a band like Kraftwerk, they start using electronic instruments in their work, and they do get to a point where they say, well, we play the instruments and the instruments play us. So there's a kind of, it's really in the interaction between man and machine and there was actually a Kraftwerk album called Man Machine, but like, it's really in that interaction where the creative work comes out. I think what's really interesting in the digital age is that constraints keep getting pulled away. So let's go back to Prince. I mean, your average 15-year-old has access to equipment, or can do things with their computer that Prince could have never dreamed of.
Yeah.
Are they making music any better than Prince, though? No, because Prince was pushing against the very limitations of his technology. He was at the very edge of what his things could do. And he also, there were less distractions. I mean, he didn't have to run an Instagram feed or tweet or anything like that. He was in the studio every day. So I think like the problem with technology and creativity is just that creativity doesn't really come out of having every option available to you. Creativity really comes out of constraint. It comes out of these situations in which you just have to make what's at hand work. And the creativity comes out of having to use what's in front of you to make something new. And I think that the challenge for people in the digital age again is that when you can do everything, it's very hard to know what to do. Do you think conversely, I love that. I think out of, a lot of creativity comes out of necessity and out of lack. I'm not necessarily talking about artistic creativity, but perhaps problem solving, but sometimes artistic. But do you think conversely, when we've got everything at our disposal, every resource, every technological kind of whatever, that maybe that inhibits creativity? I think that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, I would say that having every tool in your tool belt doesn't help at all.
Yeah,
that it's really the constraint that makes Saul Steinberg said what we respond to in art is the artist's struggle against their own limitations.
Yes,
that's actually where the work comes from, is someone rubbing up against the very edge of what is possible. I think this is why this is one of my own pet theories, but I think this is why you can enjoy a band. This is why you can enjoy a garage band and a symphony at the same time.
Yes.
So like a garage band is a couple of Joes, whatever, who just picked. That's why punk rock and the symphony can both work. Because in punk rock, you've got someone like who's just picked up a guitar and is trying to wrestle some sort of sound out of it and has a message. But then in a symphony, these people are pushing against the edges of their abilities too, these virtuosos, because they're playing. So I think that a lot of the magic of art comes from a person who is really on the edge of their abilities and also on the edge of what their equipment or their instrument or their materials can do. And I think it's sort of a result of that struggle with material and idea and time and space and constraint, that where a lot of the really good work comes from.
I totally agree. It's so interesting. I think that like with the research that I'm doing at the moment for my doctorate is in the psychology space. But as part of that, Austin, what you got to do is go back and see, with the thing that you're studying, what does the early literature say, and the early literature, and how long have they been talking about this thing that you're exploring, and what do we know and don't know? And, you got to kind of find the hole in the science and do all this stuff, right? But what is interesting is in over the last few years, probably like you, I've gone quite deep into some of the philosophy, but some of the Stoics, and literally 2,500, 3,000 years ago, they were writing about the stuff that we're writing about now, like exactly about the human experience, about jealousy and resentment and motivation and inspiration and self-management and self-awareness and self-regulation and all of these things that are like almost on trend in psychology. Literally 2,500 years, Socrates was talking about the exact same stuff. Like my research is on self-awareness, and he said 2,500 years ago, the beginning of wisdom is to know thyself. like self-awareness. There's nothing new. And they didn't have all the recent, you know, they didn't have Wikipedia, they didn't have the internet, they didn't even have pen and paper. But it's so funny to think out of that situation, came such profound wisdom and insight and beauty.
Yeah, I mean, you know, being human it's not a new thing.
No.
You know? The only thing new is you finding out about it. You know, that's what Mike Watt says. You know, so I just wrote the afterword for the 10th anniversary of Steel Like an Artist, which is coming out next year. And, you know, I make the joke that in the book, I quote Ecclesiastes, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. But the joke I made in the afterword is that was taken from the Egyptians. You know, there was an Egyptian poet 2,000 years before that who was lamenting that like everything had been said, you know.
Yes.
So the very idea that everything's been done is at least 4,000 years old. So it's like this ancient, it's really an ancient idea. And I think that is a really easy way to get new ideas in our kind of contemporary life is to do what you're doing, is to just find something in the culture that you sort of despise and then go back as far as you can and find its opposite and then resurrect that thing. You know, so pretty much anything in the culture that you can't stand, you can go back a few hundred or 1,000 years and find its opposite and resurrect it, bring it back into, you know, modern life and give it a new spin, which is what, you know, some of the great modern writers about Stoicism have done.
Yeah. Well, even the, you know, the concept of what we call today personal development is really just another label for things that we've been speaking about for thousands of years. I was going to ask you, firstly, I'll tell you something, then ask you something. So I wrote my first book in, I think 2000, and I was a gym owner. I owned gyms, and I worked a bit in the media and wrote a bit for newspapers, and, you know, very much in the motivation, high performance sport, education space. But I remember writing my first book. I had a very clear idea about what I wanted to talk about and my messages, but not a lot of confidence because I wasn't an author. I didn't train as an author. I didn't do literature at school. I wasn't, you know, I didn't see myself. And also I got, you know, not a lot of encouragement. But I remember getting my first book published, which was good. And then my second book, and I've done a few, like I've had 7 books published. And I remember what actually changed for me was I wasn't more creative, but I just had more confidence in my creative ability. And I don't think I'm definitely not massively gifted or a genius anyway. But how much do you think being able to create is about confidence on top of the innate ability?
Oh, I think it has everything to do with that. I mean, you know, who's crazy enough to think that they have something worth saying that someone will read?
Yeah, exactly.
It takes a leap of, you know, it takes a leap to have that, you know. There's a great book I just read called Several Short Sentences About Writing, and it's by a American writer named Verlin Klinkenborg. It's his name.
What a great name. Can you just tell us the title again, mate? Sorry.
Several Short Sentences About Writing.
Right.
And what Klinkenborg says is that a big part of his job as a writing teacher is to train his students to be interested in what they're interested in, basically, is to honor what they're genuinely interested in. He says that nothing in our education really trains us to do that. Most of our education is training us to be interested in the ideas of other people and what other people have said. And there's very little in our education that encourages us to be genuinely interested in what we're interested in, and to let ourselves be genuinely interested in what we're interested in. And so what Klinkenborg says is that the being a writer is, he says, a perpetual act of self-authorization, that you have to constantly authorize yourself, to give yourself a permission slip to actually do the work of writing and to go at it. And so, yeah, I think confidence is a huge part of it. Now, I also think that there's a balance of confidence and humility that leads to really good work. You know, a kind of, I think out of humility can come, you know, it's a balance between the two, you know, because the more you're humble, the more you can sort of take your ego out of the things that you've made, the more you can improve, you know, because learning is really about being open and malleable and willing to be foolish in a lot of ways, you know, to kind of so you can develop. If you think you're a master, then you don't learn much. You know, so I think writing, the thing I like about the writing life, it's also the thing I despise about it, is just that you never know what you're doing. Like you know where you sort of, like, every book you kind of like, you remember what it's like to be in these different places, but you know, you can never write the new one. The last one won't write the new one for you. You know. So everyone is like, you sort of have to, like, learn how to write again, or that's how it works for me. I kind of have to learn how to write again with every book, and I think that means that you're just always learning and you're always trying to improve, or just be different, you know, kind of grow in some way, I guess.
I actually I inherently have never had, despite what people would think, but like a level of confidence, but not overly confident. Like, there's always been that underlying self-doubt. And even when I succeeded at things and did quite well at some things, you know, feeling like a fraud. And that always showed up with me, like that self-doubt and a little bit of self-loathing, a little bit of not good enough itis, that was always present. And it was kind of a handicap, but it also kept me grounded because I never thought I was great. I still don't think I'm great. So
I don't think
it
I'm
makes
great.
me work hard. It makes me work hard because I think it's probably going to be shit this. But do you know, that's kind of what I think, you know, I think, you know, part of me knows I can do it, but there's always that underlying self-doubt.
There's that, but I also don't believe in meritocracy. I don't believe that the really great people actually get on top. I mean, look around you, you know, look at the people who are successful. Look, you know, it's the Dorothy Parker line. She's like, you know, if you want to know what God thinks about money, look at who it gives it to. You know, this idea that just because you're successful means you're good. To me, that's never really flown with me. I've always looked at, well, like, you know, like, well, geez, if they can pull it off, like, maybe I got a shot too. You still have to show up, you know, you still have to work hard. But I've always sort of had this kind of like, well, why not me? I mean, look at all these other people, you know, that's always been like at a level, you know, for me. But I will, you know, I think my readers are a little bit surprised by this. I'm driven by anger and disgust just as much as I'm driven by anything. I mean, I think when people read my books, they see them and they're very positive and they have these like kind of warm messages and they're very encouraging. And I always tell people, yeah, they are, because I've gotten so like kind of upset or disgusted by something in the culture. And then I've tried to think of what the opposite is. So every book that I've written is sort of a nice reaction to something I'm disgusted by. So for example, Steal Like an Artist, it's against this idea that there are, you know, these against the idea of genius or originality, that somehow that helps a person when they're starting out, you know, as a creative person. Show Your Work was a book that I was like, this idea that you can't, you know, the idea of self-promotion, that's a bad thing to self-promote, or, you know, so like you go on down the list. A lot of the ways that I write books is I figure out what I'm angry about, or really what I'm irritated. You know, it's like like with it, in an oyster, to make a pearl, there has to be a little grain of grit friction in there to make the pearl. So there's got to be something in my like there's got to be something in there that I can kind of agitate against. And that's really what I'm driven by. And I think, you know, for people who are, not everybody's driven that way. And so you have to really know where your fuel comes from creatively, like what it is that kind of inspires you. And for me, it's always been that kind of like irritant. I need like an irritant in order for me to work. Because if I'm too happy or I'm too content, like I'm not going to do anything.
Wow.
I think, I think about that a lot with creative people. It's like, well, if you thought the world was perfect, why would you add anything to it? I think to be somewhat maladjusted is sort of that as a, if you're going to make something, it's because there's like a problem to solve, or you think that the world could be added to in some way.
I listened to, I don't know if this is going to make you like me less, but I listened to a fellow, is it Austonian? Is that what you say? Or an Austenite.
Like an Austenite, I think. Austenite. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Joe Rogan, who's moved to Austin recently, and he's always talking about, because he's, among other things, a comic, and he's always talking about comedians being, creatives, but also fucked up and lots of issues. They're all dysfunctional. They all had, ridiculous childhoods, and they've all got dramas and problems. And he said the best comics I know are fucked up, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. People don't. Yeah, that's. Most of humor comes from sadness.
Yeah.
Most comedy comes from deep, sadness and pain. And that is what is really, I think, what is becoming very difficult for people in the culture. I think because we're such a behind the scenes culture, we're such a culture in which people are so transparent and available to us.
Yeah.
Contemporary human beings are having a hard time accepting that someone in their personal life could be very unbeautiful and could make beautiful or useful things. That's something our culture is having a really hard time with right now. And for a long time, the art or the things that were produced were made excuses for the person. So the person got away with a lot of bad things because they made such beautiful stuff. That was an injustice for sure. But now we have this thing where it's like, we really can't, we're having trouble as a culture, like dealing with that fact that like all people are imperfect, and that art comes out of really deep imperfections in a person. And, so that's sort of one of my pet things. Not that I, you got to be careful with comedians, because they'll do something to make you be a fan of. The easiest way to get your heart broken is to be a fan of a comedian.
Yeah. Do you have, like, for you, does creativity, is it a tap that you can turn on and off? I'm sure the answer is no. Is it transient? Do you have a process? Does it just come to you, or do you go to it?
I think this always surprises people, but in my day-to-day life, I don't think about creativity very much. I just kind of am like, well, I need to write something now, or, oh, I'm going to make a collage, or, oh, I'm going to make a poem or something. I just don't really think about. I think I'm someone who has spent so much time working that my brain is sort of trained to know when it's time to work, and it's kind of Pavlovian. It's like, oh, the notebook's open, go time, but that's mostly habit. That's like, if I sat down and played the piano, it's like, if I hadn't played for 6 months, it'd be real rough, so it's just that daily habit of doing it. I really don't think about being inspired very much at all. I just kind of show up, and there are obviously days that go better than other days, but it has to, I think it was Chuck Close. He said, inspiration has to find you working.
Yeah. I love how laconic you are. You're the most laid back interviewee we've ever had. It's hilarious.
Well,
It's
it's
like,
7. This is past my kids' bedtime. I'm usually 2 whiskeys in and watch and zoning out to television.
oh well,
So,
I apologize for keeping you up, mate.
I
Hey,
hope I'm not boring you.
no, it's great. I love it. No, I love how atypical you are, and that like everything, like it's just real and genuine, and it's not like you're the guy that's done 1 million interviews and you've got this bloody, I don't know, just this thing that you wheel out, which I really like that. So,
Well, I think one thing that Rogan's going to have, and the weed will probably help him with this, but in the American South, you have to move a little bit slower. You have to learn to move a little bit slower, and that's literally so you don't sweat to death.
Yeah,
it's so hot here that you really have to move. People always wonder in the South, like why people are a little bit slower. It's like, dude, because it's 110 degrees here.
Yeah.
So that was a big hurdle when I was younger, coming up from the north. It was like, why is everything so slow here? Why are people so laid back? It's like, well, because otherwise you're going to sweat to death.
Yeah, because your body's not going to work for long if you're operating at 1 million miles an hour. You spoke about schools and stuff a minute ago. Did you? And I know you did a TEDx. I think you did a TEDx gig, right?
Yeah, like 1 million years ago.
Yeah. Did you ever see? There was one which it's interesting. That a guy called Sir Ken Robinson did.
I knew what you were going to say right before you said it. I said, oh, the Ken Robinson.
Yeah, sorry.
You can't really, no, it's such a legendary talk that, it's probably the best talk given.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
he died recently.
Did he die?
Yeah, he died a few years ago.
I did not know that.
Year.
So
yeah, he was really great.
For everyone listening, I think it's called How Schools Are Killing Creativity. It was probably a decade or so ago, and I stumbled onto it a long time ago. I'm like, who is this guy? He is so clever. He was such a great presenter and storyteller.
I believe that's the talk where they're in an art class and this girl's drawing a picture and teacher says, what are you drawing? And the girl says, God. I'm drawing a picture of God. She says, well, nobody knows what God looks like. The girl says, well, they will in a minute.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I love that. That's right. They will in a minute. Because
and that's kids. I mean, being around, I usually tell people, hey, if you want to know what it's like to be really creative, you need to find a 4-year-old and spend the day with them.
Yes.
That will solve a lot of your problems.
Yeah.
Hang out with a 4-year-old all day. I mean, that was when my kids were that little, they were like little Picassos. I mean, they really had the juice. It was really invigorating to be around. I mean, I was sleep deprived, but it was really, really inspiring.
And I think also what's happening with 4-year-olds is that they're not doing something and then going, oh, gee, I wonder what everyone will think of this.
Absolutely not.
I wonder how this will be reviewed by my peers.
No, I mean, my son Jules would literally he would draw a picture, look at it, and toss it over his shoulder, and he'd grab another piece of paper. It was just so, I think it was John Baldessari, the artist, who said, I learned everything I know about drawing by being around kids.
Yeah.
Just that ability to just let it come and not judge it while it's coming. And then, that is the real magic of 4-year-olds.
So, Austin, what do you, without trying to ask too cliche a question, but like moving forward, what do you want to do? What do you want to create? What do you want to produce?
Oh, God. I mean, I'll lay down on the couch and tell you. No,
When did it all start, this thing with your mother?
Yeah. I really want to do more books. I want my books to look more like my notebooks. I mean, I feel like my books have a nice blend of verbal and visual. They have a nice blend of pictures and words. I still think they're a little linear. I think they're a little I want my books to look more like what my personal notebooks look like. I want to just keep writing and keep drawing. I want to raise my kids. I want to stay alive. I don't want to get COVID.
All the basics. All the
I want to
basics.
swim in the pool once in a while. Yeah, it's pretty. I don't have a lot of. I never had a plan. I'm not an artist who ever said I'm going to do this and I'm going to get a MacArthur and whatever. I just didn't really have a plan. I just had the faith that if I spent enough time doing this little batch of things, that some sort of life would arise out of it. And so what I try to do is I try to spend time on the things that I love, on the gifts that I feel like I have. And I just try to find out. I think the real problem for me as a writer, and I think a lot of people are having it as just people, is to know what you're genuinely interested in, to know what you're really passionate about, because we live lives now where when we open up our phone, what do people do in the morning? They like turn on this little rectangle and they look at it, and the world tells you what to be interested in.
Yeah.
And we spend very little time asking ourselves what we're actually interested in. Yeah. And so I find the real struggle of day-to-day life in this time we're in is to really know what interests you and to keep those interests up and to really dedicate yourself to some of them and to learning and to developing whatever interests and gifts you feel like you have, however small they are, and to try to keep track of that stuff and to not be distracted by the world.
And I think also we live in a kind of a time where certain professions or certain skills or qualities or attributes or outcomes are valued more highly.
Sure.
And so, like nobody's saying when he grows up, geez, I hope he becomes an artist, like God, I hope my kid does art, like nobody's saying that, which is sad.
One of my favorite writers, Joe Brainerd, he says, behind every artist is a disappointed mother.
Oh, that's hilarious. All right. Now, we really appreciate you taking some time. I know it's late at night for you, and I want to let you get on the couch with that whiskey. Tell us where people, now I know you have a big, is it a newsletter? You have a blog, or you do a mail out? Tell people where they can connect with you, find you, follow you, support you.
The easiest way to find me is at austincleon.com. That's Kleon, Austin, like the city. And that's where my blog is. I've been blogging for like 16 years. And then I have a weekly newsletter that I send out every week that people seem to like. And then my books, you can get them wherever books are sold.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for spending some time with us on the U Project. You're an interesting cat, and I like talking to you. Thanks so much.
It's good to talk to somebody from the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, dude, come out here. Come out here one day.
Nice. I have got some friends in Melbourne, so you might see me someday. I'll look you up.
I'd love to. All right, just stay on the call. We'll say goodbye to everyone, then we'll say goodbye to you off air. Tiff, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Austin.
Thank you, Tiff.
Thanks, everyone. Love you guts.